symbol of the snake eating its tail or the dragon eating its tail. And this is what we do. We're always kind of chasing after experience and conceptualizing it. And so the problem we face is to get rid of this habit. And there's different ways of doing it, right? So you use your energies and your body to move in a way in which you are kind of in sync with reality. Really, it's about letting go, right? And we have to use these techniques. They can be physical, they can be mental forms of, meditation or mantra recitation, whatever it is. We try to drop this tendency just to grasp at things.
And welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I am your humble servant and seafood, Taoist Master San Qing, and as it is appropriate for any returning guest, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Gotta love the 70s, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no kidding.
I get captured in that pop culture. My dear friend, Lama Choga, how are you, my friend?
Hello, Sanjing. How are you doing? Thanks for having me back. I'm very pleased to be here.
It's always a welcomed communion that we're having, a congregation of great thoughts that can transmute into someone's past just by listening to the words that we speak. And you are definitely a vessel and a vehicle for that very knowledge and wisdom that you bring to what you share with the people that listen. So I'm
going to try my best, at least.
Pardon me?
I got to try my best, at least.
Yeah. Well, why don't you share with new audience members just a brief abbreviation of your journey, how you got here? What would be a good summation of how you acquired this knowledge, this wisdom?
Well, I think it's a journey, right? We get on a journey, and what you need in order to get on a journey is kind of like an inception or some kind of impetus. You need to want to get somewhere or to find something out, and then you set out, right? First, you got to make a plan. For example, I think I'll go visit San Qing in Nevada, and then once you've done that, you've got to kind of look at the roadmaps or figure out how it was done in the past. And so for me, from a young age, I was kind of perplexed by these, existential paradoxes. And many people would think that if you were like that, you're a bit strange or you're a difficult person. It's like, what difference does it make? We're here and we just got to survive, make a living. So what difference does it make where the universe came from? But this is something that kind of played on my mind very much throughout my life. And it was difficult, really, to find a path. Initially, I started doing yoga. I was a yoga teacher for quite a while. And what interested me the most about yoga was the meditation. Maybe it's just my, predilection, is liking this sort of mind work. There are other ways you can practice, right? You can do asana, you can do tai chi, etc. But I was most interested in this. And I found at some point that there was very limited instructions available in the yoga tradition. And it was very difficult to access that. And through more research, then I came to discover, or maybe I came to the decision, that the most comprehensive set of instructions existed within the Tibetan tradition, but especially within something called the Other Empty, Madhyamaka, the school of the Other Empty, the Jonang school of Tibetan Buddhism. And so I pursued that. And a lot of it was luck, really. I think, we say it's karma, so it's like past karma from another life. But I kind of fell into things, really. And so I say it's luck, but what I mean is it must be something I did in past lives. And I was able to meet, kind of an authentic teacher. And this has kind of been the standard theme, really, on my spiritual journey. It's just kind of falling into things and lucking out. And so I managed to spend 12 years in retreat and to receive pretty damn good education for Western standards, not in terms of what the Tibetans get. They do 21 years of like 16 hours a day with almost no break. But I got a pretty good education, and I met an authentic meditation master. And so that was really helped me. And then gaining insight into what it's all about, when we're talking about this essential point of mind, coming to understand that was really the thing that was a game changer for me. But again, it was kind of like luck. I must have had a connection with my teacher in a past life. I mean, recently I traveled to Korea, and I went to visit a Yuna there. He's like a Zen master, and I wanted to interview him. And he said to me, "Oh, do you want to meditate in the Zendo?" So I spent a few days there meditating in the Zendo. And then we had the interview, and he said, "You know what? I've been here for 15 years, and there hasn't been anybody who's come here from the outside and been able to meditate in the Zendo." And I just thought, oh, it's the same thing. It's just I lucked out, right? You know? So it's been kind of like that, really, stumbling my way along the path.
That would be sort of like following this cause and effect model of potentially on the verge of a Newtonian realization, maybe. But I mean,
Yeah.
this is a model that some people will embody and some people will dispute that
Yeah.
framework of reality. How do you apply
Yeah.
it that it becomes realized for you, self-realized?
I think really it's, I mean, you will know about this, right? Because in your tradition, there's this notion of the flow of the cosmos and experience and how everything is kind of in the right place, right? The problem is that we think we're after something, we need to fix something or change things and make them better. And in that way, then we lose the flow. And this is very similar, really, to what we call the Mahamudra Dzogchen in the Tibetan tradition, because it's really about being authentic. And that means to engage with experience in an honest manner. And what we tend to do, I mean, the analogy we get in the West, I think it originally comes from Egypt and ancient Greece, but in Celtic traditions, and they have this symbol of the snake eating its tail or the dragon eating its tail. And this is what we do. We're always kind of chasing after experience and conceptualizing it. And so the problem we face is to get rid of this habit. And there's different ways of doing it, right? So you use your energies and your body to move in a way in which you are kind of in sync with reality. Really, it's about letting go, right? And we have to use these techniques. They can be physical, they can be mental forms of, meditation or mantra recitation, whatever it is. We try to drop this tendency just to grasp at things. And so when we say self-realization, it sort of sounds to people like it means you don't have to do anything. Well, enlightenment's spontaneous, so you just sit back and relax and it'll happen. That doesn't work, right? What it means is that reality is happening for us. The authentic nature is there. It's unchanging, and it's not something that needs to be developed or uncovered. But we're always a little bit behind or a little bit ahead of what's going on. And so that's really the true meaning of self-realization, is that experience itself is enlightenment. But we miss this point because we cling so strongly to notions of good or bad, these things of being superior or inferior, self and other. But it's not just enough to tell people there is no self, there is no other, because then they just go a bit strange. They're like, I don't exist, you don't exist, this bus that's rushing at me doesn't exist, You got to jump out of the way, right? We're kind of mortal. And until we really kind of achieve a state of liberation, then we'll always be susceptible to mundane suffering. And so where we say it's self-arising, spontaneous, at the same time we need somewhere to get our fulcrum in, right? We've got to get the lever in somewhere. And there's different things you can do, right? You use alchemy, you use motion, etc. And primarily in the Kagyu tradition, then we use meditation.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's like I always remind people the old expression: "There's a method to the madness." By realizing that a form of realization through something that can be tangibly repeated, you can then go from a psychotic delusion to a realized tangible material experience. And that experience is the very, just like right now, our conversation, as we start to unify, commune, and the oscillation of our energies as we validate through the chill and expansion, the contracting and expanding of that unity, which some people might call the singular, which is so passe for most physicists. They don't, oh, the unified field, or perhaps the zero point, or how they want to construct a understanding of what it is they're experiencing. This is the very, I think, the distraction and the dukkha, as you would put it, for the human condition is I need to understand the very nature of everything instead of allowing and receiving and accepting this very moment. And so from a Taoist perspective, we're looking at the simplicity of all things as a bellows. We are contracting and expanding at the same time. We're all things and nothing at the same time. But can you find that Death Star moment, the Luke Skywalker moment, between the contraction, between the breath in and the breath out? A Taoist would reveal the primordial mother, the Wu Ji, which is the stillness, which someone would identify with as a path of ascension, imperium, a dominion, an ability to access all things. Now, that will not be materialized until you can create it within Taoism. It's an alchemical process. The alchemists will realize and unify the sun, the earth, the moon, the platinum, the gold, the silver. These elements will be crystalline in revealing the true alchemy and the ability to alter or change or divert or flow, which we call Wu Wei, which so once you hit the Wu Ji, which is the primordial mother, are you able to replicate this resonance that is part of probably the cultivational practice of meditation from your lineage, is being able to stay and hold that resonance. So when you transmute this perfection, as we put it within Taoism, like to wave to matter to particle, realized by your attention intention, cutting from the cloth of the mother, the primordial mother, creating distortion, which would be in the self-evident realization of energy. And that energy will then form vibration. That vibration has a frequency. The frequency, if met with resonance from any manifesting coach that is worth $5, would say, this will be yours. Oh, yes, it will. Resonate and hold that line, and you will create your wildest imagination and turn it into a reality, which is kind of, I think, the fast that and the fallacy of the nonsense that manifestation is in this reality right now in 2024. They get lured in by it because their desire is material. That's fine, okay, but that material becomes very limited because once they acquire it, it still doesn't make them whole. They're still seeking for something more to make them whole. So they acquire that energy potential and it still has a diminished return. And you're sitting there going, okay, I got $1 million. I've got $1 billion. I've got the hot wife. I've got the Lamborghini. I've got all these things that were told to me will make me whole, yet I am still deficient. I am still seeking that realization. I'm still seeking for an acknowledgement of what the truth is because of that energy deficiency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, and it really depends on the kind of perspective you use. And I quite like your Star Wars analogy. So the thing is here is we've got this obstacle, and that's our Darth Maul, right? And in terms of the Buddha Dharma, at least, then this is our identification and our clinging. And whereas we use alchemy, we also use energy work in the body. For example, there's a chakra work, Tibetan yogas like Trokor and that sort of thing. Ultimately, then the source of everything is this awareness, this naked awareness that we have. And where we tend to go wrong is that we think we need to develop awareness, or we need to create a resonance, right, with the cosmos. And the point is that this resonance is always there. What is our Darth Maul is the way we convolute or we cling to things, we identify with them. And primarily this manifests for us in the form of our kind of mind poisons. And provisionally we kind of think of it as being like greed and that sort of thing. But really it's this subtle moving from this middle way state of abiding in the natural reality, the natural sort of source of all phenomena, and this tendency to either grasp at things, to cling to them, or to push them away. This is good, this is bad. And this kind of sets us off of our trajectory. So really all of this energy work that we do, the alchemy, working with the chakras, are means of purifying our misconception. They're not a way of developing some kind of wisdom or insight, because this wisdom is what is called primordial wisdom. In the Korean tradition, they say prior knowledge is kind of what they say in the Zen tradition. But really it is that it means that it's unborn. It was always there. It always existed. And this is what we call spontaneous awakening. But again, what people get wrong is that they think, well, it's there. That's how it is. Everything's enlightenment. I don't need to do anything. And then they just carry on with their usual preconceptions and misjudgments, this misappropriation, right? Misappropriating experiences. And the other thing we do is we see everything backwards. And what we do is we objectivize. So we objectivize something like enlightenment. And because of that, then we think, well, if I do this particular type of body work, then this will manifest my object, my goal, and it's something external. And really we have to turn everything around and lose this objectivization. But the tendency is so strong that when people, for example, they'll come to your retreat, let's say, and you'll give them some practices and you'll work with alchemy, and then at some point they'll feel this flow, right? They'll kind of resonate with the cosmos. And that is an authentic experience. But what happens is we immediately, because of our habit, we grasp at it. Oh, that's what I'm looking for. And then it becomes me looking for this. Right? And then you lose that center where you're no longer balanced in this middle way, as you say, this kind of union of emptiness and appearance, or the yin and yang, that sort of thing. We lose that because we immediately go back to our habit. There's me and I want that. That's my goal. How do I develop that? What happened? Oh, he did this. He gave me this medicine. I did this posture. If I repeat those methods, then I will achieve this goal, rather than seeing it from the point of view that this was always there. That was the unborn and natural state. And so we kind of, our approach is completely reversed. And this is where people get frustrated. And also why just doing nothing doesn't work. Because habit's so strong, right? Very strong habit.
I mean, it comes right back to one of my teachers, the Jade Emperor. He reminds you, when you accept you know nothing, you know everything. So all this need and desire, I call it the spiritual dragon. They get bitten by it and they pursue it for their natural born life. The cycle of their biology will determine this constant desire and need to replicate the paranormal, the supernatural, some phenomenon where they're like, this is from the mundane, which I refer to as more a misaligned realignment. When they come to that evidence base that, oh my goodness. And most people start with this desire. I always tell people, you use the method of Taoist alchemy to acquire that realization. Once you acquire it, you return back to the default of your reality, which is selflessness, servitude. And that true evidence-based can come in all forms. You will be able to stand where you are in your timeline and reflect on that and go, I've had moments of selflessness. When? Oh my goodness. I helped grandma. I gave to a nonprofit. I gave myself to the service of others. And when that moment happens, you realize you are not thinking. You're feeling that very that moment, that present moment we call the Wu Ji. So within Taoism, we always remind people, when you are acting in virtue, you have none whatsoever. You do not. It's like, this is a very telltale sign that you're in the identity, you're in the personality, as someone would say, the ego, and they're still looking for that approval, that need for others to validate them as the next coming of Jesus, the healer, the Buddha, the universe, the alchemist, all these things. So I have no issue whatsoever when someone comes to me, I want to learn all the alchemy to separate electric from magnetic and do all these crazy things and heal and magic and that's fantastic. But once you acquire them, if you still feel that emptiness and that desire that you have to repeat that and stay within that, you have to now reflect and realize that you're assuming an identity. You're forming a belief system that is not a knowing. That knowing is no place, no person, no thing. This is a state where you are able to access what we call the primordial mother. The evidence of this is serendipitous, it's synchronistic. You are in the flow, as you put it, as Bruce Lee had coined it, so many decades ago and made it super sexy. It's like the flow, baby. Right. And this
Yeah,
is the resonance, right? This is the
appealing
resonance.
to people. Yeah,
Yeah. And people,
cultural resonance. You know.
right. And I'm so in support of and agreement with what you're saying in relation to the misdirection and the perplexing effect of the paradox of the human condition. And like
Hmm.
we are subject to electromagnetism. We are subject to what people would perceive as duality. And you are
Mm.
looking to, read the Hollywood version. I need to go to a non-dualist sort of point of non-centric realization. Well, the Vesica point that most people that we are speaking of, as you would put it, I put it as the Wu Ji, the primordial mother, the access to that is the very thing, the substance. And that's where it's like you cannot be deluded if you have evidence based moments within this material that
Hmm.
can give you the knowing. And so you are no longer looking. And so the
Hmm.
effortless action, the Wu way, the effortless effort, which people are like, well, what does that mean? I have to do something or nothing. I've heard manifesting coaches tell me I must take action, I must do this, I must do that. It all comes in an interesting sort of like a version of reality that can be determined once you access a resonance, and that will come through your path. You do not have to attempt to reach for it. As you said, my dear
Hmm.
friend, it's already there. The groundwork, the infrastructure is
Hmm.
present. You just have to reveal through the veil, as they would put it, and
Hmm.
recognize that it never left you. And now you
Hmm.
have to be able to now transmit that and as a knowing. And I find that the method is always so nourishing, and it brings
Hmm.
you back to that point. Now, furthermore, I always tell people the ultimate is detachment, and there's a point of no return. And they're like, oh my goodness, Jiffa, you are just completely crazy. What are you talking about? Well, understanding that that point of no return is the realization, and many spiritual teachers go on about, well, once you acquire the access to the consciousness, you don't need to come back to planet Earth and reproduce the same karmic model that is already been realized through your journey as a lens of consciousness. Now, a lot of that
Hmm.
thing is a lot of nonsensical, sort of like made up shit that people like to sell. Whereas when
Hmm.
you don't return, you are, as some people would use, this imperium, this command, this maestro, that your very action and inaction prescribes the same rippling effect within this material. So there's a point of
Hmm.
no return where you are no longer identifying as anything, and your ability to sample your personality or be in the present moment, or furthermore be in another dimension, as you would put it, is the mastery of that very moment. And part of that
Hmm.
will always return you to the default of selflessness and servitude. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does, and it's interesting because even the bodhisattvas do this. They leave the mundane world figuratively, anyway. But
Mm-hmm.
they leave identification behind and self behind, but then they willingly manifest within the mundane world for the benefit of others. So it's very much the same kind of point. So the key of all this is delusion. Is what is delusion? And really, it's the question is to the extent to which that we get rid of delusion, then we make what is called seemingly progress. But we see delusion as like kind of seeing things in the wrong way. It's not just about not understanding. Most people think it's like if you give me some knowledge, if you give me something, then I'll understand, and then I will have realization. But there's something on top of that, is that on top of not understanding, then we also make shit up, basically.
Right, right, right,
Yeah,
right. Which is
and
delusion, which is the
yeah,
very dukkha that you're speaking of.
yeah, yeah. And so, really, all spiritual practice is about reducing delusion or reducing this kind of ignorance. But there's different kind of extents to which we do this, and part of it is because as you say, most people don't want to go to that point of no return. They're too afraid. They don't want to get that point where they lose all identification, because they feel like then there's nothingness. They're afraid of like nothingness. It's a fear of nihilism, right? It terrifies us. And of course, most people don't have that kind of level of courage. So there are different paths. I mean, there are theistic paths in which you just give up everything to God. All responsibility is given up to the agency of God, and then you don't have to worry anymore. And that is a limited form of losing your clinging, and will only take you so far. You will experience divinity, but it is based on very strong clinging to this agency of God as being something separate and, distinct, permanent, perfect, etc. And because of this, then you can still suffer. Because, for example, you'll know this, that many people within particular traditions become very, very, very kind of biased and very easily irritated if you say anything that contradicts their tradition. Rather than being able, you can't even identify the differences between the methods of different traditions, because people are so kind of, partisan and polarized, and they're so attached to their own tradition that if you say anything, they become very upset. So it's a sign that there's some limit to which they can remove their suffering ultimately, and that's because there is still this kind of deluded identification with something real. And so the different traditions, then they approach this differently. And for example, Taoism goes on a long way from what we traditionally see in theistic religions, but also in this kind of pantheism, and in, perhaps you could also say, I think, the way it's identified within the Advaita Vedanta, because they still identify with this ultimate Brahman kind of thing, which is like very much a God identification, whereas in the Tao, they talk more about the kind of balance of the yin and yang and the flow of the cosmos, and it's not so much theistically identified. So there are these kind of subtle differences, but every spiritual path has its place, and it's got a lot to do with what that individual wishes to achieve. And for most people, they just want to experience some well-being and happiness, right? They're very happy. For example, most people, they're very happy to just do a bit of Tai Chi, and it makes them feel good, makes their body feel kind of comfortable, and they feel happy, and they don't ask any further questions about what's actually going on. Whereas you could go on, for days explaining all the intricacies of it. They don't want to know that. They just want to have a bit of well-being. And for most people, that's all they want. So there's just no point in teaching them these higher levels of practice and the intricacies of, Taoist alchemy, for example.
Yeah.
Similarly, the Dzogchen and the Mahamudra, they just get a headache if you start going on about it.
Well, I really believe there's this effort to really put the foot on the gas of humanity, and
Yeah.
there's a very, very clear effort to separate the seeker, the idea that they could possibly find this, as you put it, Brahman, Wuji, consciousness,
God, Jesus.
God, Jesus. This is the very deconstructing of their ability to merge, to commune with that divinity, as you put it. There's a conscious effort,
Because it's objectivized, right? It's objectivized. That the Brahman, the Wuji, it's objectivized. So immediately, that's the opposite of what we're trying to
right?
realize.
Which is that perplexing part where the paradox will continue until either you reveal the misery or you end the misery, and it becomes humanistic in the sense that we're now identifying with the body, mortality. As my teacher Jade Emperor will always say, remind the man mortality is real, that there is this permanence of a cycle within this human condition that presents itself with mortality, with the human flesh. And it's how you nurture that within your experience. Where I think we reference reincarnation, incarnation. These are ideas to many, concepts for most, and very few realize them as their breath, as that present moment. It's so far removed because of what, as you put it, to not return, and within the alchemical process It's about returning to remembering who you are. And then furthermore, as this becomes realized, there is a point of no return. And that's
Yeah.
where people are like, holy crap. It's like when I remember I shared with my mother decades ago, I said, when you believe, when you know you are not of this physical body, what can harm you? And the first
Yeah.
thing that came out of her mouth was, I don't want to die. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, and
Fear of
this
death, right?
where the
Disappearing.
fear, the charge of the emotional content of the human condition presents itself, which is the dukkha that people keep jumping over obstacles or reinvest in this storyline, which, as you put it, that deluded state is where most people are. They create and craft these stories in their mind, and then when you come across something that might be representative of that through someone talking about hermetic principles, because it's so sexy to talk about Egyptian mysticism these days. But oh well, if it's all mental, this is one of the laws of the universe. Well, first of all, I would dispute a law of any kind is a construct of some sort of man-related derivative and a deterministic endpoint. Instead of this is a vehicle that some people may use to help you identify with what it is you're experiencing. But when you can't start putting it into these formulas, it becomes very limited. If you want to come from psychology, biology, neurology, religion, I am something. This I am very distracted and separated state, which people love to use, is the very unraveling of their ability to access what we call Wu Ji, what we call
Yeah.
cosmic consciousness. It will not, you will never, ever come even close to that if you are constructed with these layers of your perception of reality. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's two points in what you just said, and one is about, for example, the laws of the universe. And as you said, this is a very kind of something that the sort of physicists are really keen on, this notion of the laws of the universe. But in terms of the Buddha Dharma, then really the understanding is that there are many, many universes and that the laws aren't fixed. So, for example, we could say there are universes where stars burn cold. That's just an example. But we, like you say, we take for granted that the dimensions, the laws of the universe that we experience are the only way of experiencing reality. And what the Buddha taught is that all the different types of being have different eyes, different ears, and that means that they perceive reality in different ways. And these are all manifestations of karma. So these things are not in any way fixed. Maybe here we're not talking about the sort of cosmic law as presented in Taoism, because there it's more fluid, right? It's important. This is also related to the second thing that you said, and it was about identity. So identity is why we become kind of bound to suffering, bound to the mundane world. But identity can be used creatively. And the use of identity creatively is a means of benefiting others and also bringing an end to suffering. For example, to the manifestation as a bodhisattva or a Buddha, Tathagata, the Yidams, the Taoist masters, etc. This is where we take something provisionally that is a mistake, our delusion, and then through creativity, it can be transformed into something that is beneficial and also itself becomes a path. In fact, all paths are based on method, and method is a mistaken identification. But we can identify with virtue and we can identify with non-virtue. And to some extent, these are very stark contrasts. And when we say virtue and non-virtue, it's not about how the outer appearance is either seems to be good or bad. Really, when we say virtue, it's about that which brings us closer to no self or to the realization of emptiness, the identitylessness of phenomena. And that is what makes something virtuous or non-virtuous. And so at times, something that seems to be a negative act can be a positive act, and vice versa. And this has all got to do with this idea of creativity. And this creativity is also the way, as I said, that the different means by which universes manifest, i.e., they're laws of the universe. It's not just laws of our universe, but laws of other universes. And so, someone who gains mastery, we could say, like in your tradition, you talk about becoming a master of alchemy, is somebody who gains control over this, gains control over manifestation. And I'm not saying it in the way that we look at manifestation in the 21st century, because it's just a way of, it's like a type of shopping. Manifestation these days, it's like a way of getting what you want. It's like nowadays we can pay with our mobile phone, or we can tap the credit card on a machine. They've even got rings now. I was quite surprised when I came back from Nepal. I saw everybody with their debit cards, like tapping them on things. I was like, what are they doing? And then people are doing it with their phones, and I had no idea. But now we've got all these different means of acquiring stuff we want. And so for most people, this manifestation is just like that. It's just like getting money or happiness or a girlfriend. But what we're talking about here is different. It's a profound level of creativity. And by realizing the true nature, or by gaining skill or skillful means on the path, then we gain control over manifestation, a creative use of identity, personality. And it is also said that the great masters through this gain control over what we conventionally think of as the laws of the universe. So they don't interact with matter the way we do. And there's many stories of this. But I mean, it's a sort of thing that people think is just are just stories, myths, that sort of thing. So it's not very helpful talking about it too much. But we do see this. I mean, there's lots of fakes out there, but we do see, for example, Taoist masters who have the ability to harness energy. And we see Hindu masters who do amazing things. They can have surgery without any anesthetic, just through the power of their meditation. So it's certain that there are things going on there that we don't understand. It's got to do with this, taking control of manifestation. That itself is predicated on on a mistaken notion. For example, bodhisattvas work for the benefit of sentient beings. But those sentient beings are taught to be illusory. They're not real. It's not like they're deceiving themselves, but again, they're using this creative manifestation of the compassionate work for the benefit of illusory sentient beings to manifest this ultimate kind of love that is, the final truth.
Amen to that, brother. I mean, it does. It comes down to, people on that Gnostic path of self-realization that turn into this, they nurture and hold on to, as you put it, they're grasping for the permanence of something that is always in a form of creation and deconstruction. That bellows that we speak of is the very oscillating resonance, the currency of this dualism. This is what it is. It's like you are contracting and expanding at the same time. You're all things and nothing at the same time. And people are, what the are you talking about? And yet, when you realize it from a Taoist perspective, you can dilute it down to the simplicity of, is your glass half full or empty? And you can enter in very quickly, inception wise, into a very fast track sort of realization if you could adopt and embody that as a childlike nature, accept everything at face value. If you can quickly do that, for whatever reason, you're in tune with your guides, your guardians, your angels, whatever your version of Buddha. This is where I talk about the union, the communion that I have with my teachers as I channel them, as this is a high level of ascension within a spiritual path these days. Most people call it, Akashic records, halls of Amente, God, Buddha, Tao. The validation of that self-realization is the repeatable experience. I consider my communion with my teachers, if I channel a specific teacher like Lao-Tzu, it is a dialogue to a monologue, which is the primordial mother. This realization is evidence in this material. So it's like, well, how do you acquire something that can be so knowing? Well, when you pull out of what someone would consider thin air information, whether it comes in the light information, energetic potential, you are able to craft from this electromagnetism, the polarizing effect, unity, a unified version, what we call the primordial mother, that is not from the same electromagnetic spectrum. This is how you materialize a resonance that is in the form of what someone would consider manifestation, magic, healing, whatever it is. And furthermore, this understanding comes to this incredible, I love the insight that you share with your wisdom on karma, because karma in of itself is funny. For a Taoist, it's nothing more than, a comedy sort of skit for most humans, because they live with that polarizing effect. And Taoist alchemy, furthermore magic, is using the grids and the understanding that someone is obsessed with the identity of personality, the cult of personality, that song from the 80s, remember that? Cult of personality. And with that, you are subject to that polarizing effect of the emotions that will distract you, that will misguide you, that will dilute you and delude you into what is perceived as real. So when you lay down a track of a highly involved magical talisman or something in those lines of a grid, we use star stepping, things of that nature, we attune to the universe to transmute something that is material here, that can create change, that is really part of what, when you perceive the contracting and expanding, that's what you're doing. You're observing that. You have a moment. You will be all things and nothing. It is never ending, whereas we remind people, this is the currency of this reality, yet man is not like that. Man is mortal. And that's where people get deluded. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
interesting point, because really karma is illusory, but it's very much predicated on the notion of identity. And because of that, because of our grasping, then karma itself is infallible. So this is the mechanism by which talismans and alchemy and everything else can work. Because, as you say, we take these things to be real. And so that because we take them to be real, and this taking things to be real is what shapes our karmic experience, then it means that things have actions, they have forces that work on this mundane experience. And a lot of it has to do with intention. And so there's a caveat here when I talk about the creative power of manifestation, and that is it can very easily go wrong, and often does, because it can be used for destruction as much as it can be used for benefit. And sadly, this often happens on the spiritual path, where through their practice, then people develop some ability to sway their karma or to influence manifestation. And if underlying, then they're still afflicted by their strong negative emotions. That's always the danger that this will, like I say, go horribly wrong. And it often does within spiritual communities. It's quite powerful, right? And this ability to influence others. You can encourage others towards virtue, but at the same time, you can deceive and manipulate people. And when this energy goes wrong, when it merely becomes this dark side, going back to Star Wars analogy, and then very quickly things can go wrong because it's very powerful, right? You look at some of these large spiritual communities that have gone wrong, then this kind of power of the group of many people all focused on one thing, if that object of focus is mistaken and if it's negative, then so you need wisdom, right? And that's why it's a good idea to rely on authentic masters and teachers, like you say, to commune with your teachers or to commune with Lao Tzu, because these individuals, we could call them provisionally, then they have pure intention, right? Which is this unbiased, they remain in balance. They remain in balance. They don't drift to these extremes of merely being yin or merely being yang. And because of that, if we can rely on that source, and as you say, we gain guidance. But it's pretty high level stuff. For most people, this is just way too difficult and too hard to achieve and really difficult to understand. And so a lot of what we do is just try to get people to apply themselves to what we think of as kind of mundane virtue, doing good stuff and not bad stuff and avoiding negativities, etc. Right? For example, inherently, this comes up in epistemology and the Buddha Dharma. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with alcohol itself. But when somebody takes alcohol and they lose control of their mind, then it becomes very dangerous because of the incredibly powerful creative aspect of mind. But the thing itself doesn't have good or bad. But for most people, you say, you're really better off if you don't become an alcoholic, right? Or if you don't take fentanyl, because it's just going to mess you up, So for most of what we do has to be on that level, just to steer people away from that which is just going to get them into more trouble. And then if you start talking about divine manifestations or whatever, then they're lost. And often what many people do is they just cling to that. It's just like, wow, that sounds amazing. I want that. How much does it cost? And then they develop this craving, which again it's just like spiritual heroin, right? Feels good. I want more of it, and then we just spiral. So it's quite difficult, right? I mean, you know this yourself, having students. It's difficult to find the balance.
Oh, it is. It's that when someone comes to you with an absolute truth about facing around the other direction, because this is the very underpinning of a deluded state where that permanency from their belief system does not become a knowing. They just stay in that belief, and that becomes the very unraveling of their mortality. So furthermore, I always tell people I've met gurus and masters that literally are over a century-year old physically, and they smoke a bag of weed all day long, and they alcohol, and
And
they
they're
do,
absolutely fine.
but they are
Yeah.
in a state of no return. They are not attached to the limitation of the human condition.
Yeah, it's like
By
the Hindu
doing that,
Babas. Many of them are just the crazy amounts of dope they smoke, but
right,
they have lots of spiritual practice. But then all the Westerners, they come to India and they go to Varanasi and they see all these Babas and things, and they think, that sounds good. And then they get off their head and they do all kinds of crazy things and get into trouble, and it just they get nowhere, right?
right,
Because
right.
first you've got to have that foundation, that
You
sort of
really do.
foundation
I
of
mean, that's
practice.
like what we call the constitution, the Jing within Taoism. You must fortify
Yeah,
that
yeah,
constitution within the physicality, so that you can be able to contain the energy
yeah,
potential. And if
yeah.
without containing that energy potential, you will unravel. And furthermore, I mean,
No.
this leads us to things like the wutiki, the jinn, the mind parasites that are all
Yeah,
part of
yeah, yeah,
indigenous practices, where you are
yeah,
deluded. You're getting this messaging. You believe you're on the path of spiritual enlightenment, when in actuality, you're on a one-way ticket to complete
yeah.
destruction. Which,
Annihilation, yeah.
right. So, I mean, this brings me to that very point, and it's so nourishing when I hear your own realization, your own wisdom of this. I always tell people, look, alcohol addiction. This is a form of understanding that this is a vehicle that you use until it's no longer of any use. And people are like, excuse me, what? Well, will come to that realization. It will come in the form of physically deconstructing your very identity as a human form, and it will present itself. Or furthermore, you will go, there is no, I'm no longer getting the effects of whatever this is that, and people, this is a very popular thing right now, the psychonaut path of stimulus, where we need to go into, communion with some other a foreign agent that will stimulate and open the gateway to my own self-realization, when in turn, you and I both know, once you reveal it, you can remember and cultivate that frequency at will. But that's part of the path, right? Part of the
Yeah.
development of that path that you've shared with me today, going, most people won't go there. I would have to agree with you. There are very few people. They want the trappings, they want the miracles, they want the healings, the manifestation, and that's a side effect. Once you obtain that awareness, it becomes, it falls back into the mundane, and falls back into, okay, that's an achievement. It's like acquiring a possession, a material item.
Yeah, it's an appearance, right? It's
Yeah, it's transitory. It's
appearance.
very,
Yeah.
it's fleeting, and it should be. It should be another realization as you continue your path to that place of Wu Ji. And to
Yeah.
do that, you have to realize that it is kind of like a game. You're moving on your own path. you're realizing this, it brings you back to whole. You'll know when you're whole because you will be selfless, you will be in servitude, and there won't be thought to it. There'll be no
Yeah.
mental gymnastics where you have to think about what is the outcome that I will get from being selfless? What am I
Yeah.
doing that will give me a return on my investment? There is no return. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it totally makes sense. I think the problem is we tend to jump to conclusions. We're very ready to kind of imagine that we've had some high level of realization as human beings in general. It's funny because people are very kind of pragmatic these days and have a lot of faith in science. But as soon as they come to the spiritual path, then they very easily get into supernatural kind of experiences or fabricating supernatural experiences, and they'll just do some Tai Chi for a week or do some yoga, and suddenly they think, wow, that's just so amazing. I've just realized the nature of mind. But it's because they've been so kind of wrapped up in their mundane lives, so insular, that as soon as they get a little peek, you scratch the window, you're in a dark room and the windows are covered in filth, and you just scratch it, a little bit of light comes through, and you think, wow, that's amazing. But it's just nothing compared to if you were actually outside and awake and, in the broad daylight. But to us, it seems really significant. And so we have this tendency to kind of get ahead of ourselves and jump to conclusions. And this is also why, like, you're using substances, microdosing is so popular these days. Because we, take some LSD or something like that, and you think, well, that's just the most amazing experience. I felt like I'm one with the universe. The next morning, you say, "Wow, you had this amazing experience, didn't you?" And you're like, "I don't know, I don't remember." You kind of like, "Can I have some coffee right now?" I don't feel very good. It's like we totally lose it, right? So we kind of miss the context. I mean, I have to say that when I was younger, that I did experiment with this, and they say something within the yogic tradition is that with the use of, like ganja, hashish, then you can elevate yourself to a very high level of consciousness. But what happens is when you stop smoking, then you just drop down to the earth. And that's very much the experience that I had. And I wouldn't say it was totally unproductive. There are some things that I gained from that. But really, it's quite clear to me, if I'd taken that on as a path, I would just be in an emotional and psychological mess at the moment, And the other thing is, once you gain this sort of level of realization, for example, Trungpa used alcohol as his practice, and he drank bucket loads. In fact, Akong Rinoche did the same. And they're really kind of really advanced practitioners anyway. But the thing is, it's like once you get some higher level of experience in your practice, you don't actually need these things anyway.
No,
It's like,
it
it doesn't really make any difference.
That's part of following your path and your teaching, just as
Yeah.
other people of mine, is that you can replicate the old expression, the honeymoon is over, is absolute nonsense. You can resonate and maintain that and expand that within this cycle of contracting and expanding. You can hold that resonance for eternity if you choose to. But that imperium, that command must be derived from a unified state, not a polarizing state. And that's where methods, in my opinion, become very, very helpful to the self-realized gnosis that comes
Yeah.
with the path.
Well, we need methods, right? But really, we need somebody to guide us as well, because we don't always know what the best methods are, and we tend to cling to the methods that are just things that we like. We hear about. Oh, you can use alcohol. Like if you're an alcoholic, you can use alcohol to get enlightened, and we think that sounds good. I like that one. But if you had a skilled teacher, they would say, actually, that's not a good method for you because you're already really addicted to alcohol. We'll try something else. But for us, we just gravitate to the things that we already like. Many people say this. They say, oh, I need to find something that resonates with me. But really what we're saying is we just want to reinforce our own prejudices and our own likes and dislikes. And sometimes we can't see that. So it's good to have somebody who's got a bit more experience who can guide us and kind of understands our own disposition. For some people, then they're a bit, they lack courage and are a bit shy, a bit afraid. And then their teacher is not going to encourage that. They're going to try to get them to be a bit more courageous and to challenge themselves, because the obstacle is that they're too withdrawn, reserved, they don't have any courage in order to apply themselves. But at the same time, some people are very courageous, very outgoing, And if you give them these sorts of practices, they tend to become egomaniacs. And this also happens in many spiritual communities. So it's kind of really good to have somebody who can be objective, look from the outside and help you decide which methods, because there's so many different methods. And some of them are more dangerous than others. It's like these things like Trungpa using alcohol and stuff. They're methods if you want to make really high levels of realization very quickly, but they're incredibly dangerous. And all kinds of things can go wrong. And for most people, you just have to avoid it. It's better to go slow and steady up the mountain rather than try to sort of paraglide or wingsuit your way to enlightenment.
Well, that really is what goes on with this spiritual new age. I'm good. I got this. I felt energy. I mean, if I had a penny for how many people come to me with what they consider a Kundalini experience, and like I'm not dismissing energy potential, I'm not dismissing they're activating some energy architecture, which is within all of us. But what happens is I've only ever come across 3 what I consider yogic masters of Kundalini, and with that has been a commitment of consciously many decades, and furthermore the shorter period of time. So within those 3 Kundalini masters, 2 of them I met within the jungles of Indonesia, and they're levitating. They're doing what we consider supernatural things, and the other one is one of my students. And people go, well, if he's your student, why aren't you doing it? Because it doesn't excite me. It does. It doesn't. I'm not. I don't need to. I've passed go and I've collected my $200. That part of the alchemy. What excites me from my personality is witnessing physical, mental, emotional healing. This still is a very exciting Sherlock to my Watson experience as part of the journey. And it's kind of like it sort of nurtures my imagination, and furthermore how I got deep into my own path as a Taoist priest and a teacher is that excitement, nurturing this imagination from my childhood within all this sort of like ancient sort of ritual that comes in sort of more pop culture forms, right? I like to tell people that I give them an embodiment of Big Trouble in Little China meets Last Airbender, and they had a baby. This is the kind of magic. Yeah, you got to start somewhere, but that gateway will open itself to furthermore, because within those masters, they are perceived as at face value enlightened, but just because you can transmute energy doesn't make you enlightened. Actually, quite a few people I've come across are complete assholes, and they create miracles. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with the enlightened path of that Wu Ji. Just because you can transmute energy and you've cultivated and focused your attention on one thing, this is a very deficiency and distraction that I always talk to people. Once you acquire it, if you're still obsessing over it, there's something that you need to commune with. That it's necessary.
And like you say, like ordinary people develop these skills, clairvoyance and being able to walk on hot coals and that sort of thing. And in the Buddha Dharma, it's not seen as being important. In fact, what is taught is that this manifesting miracles is the lowest form of teaching others. It's like at the last straw. When everything else hasn't worked, then you might do something like that. But in general, it's not a very good form of helping someone on the path, because then they just cling to supernatural experiences. And what you need is inner realization. But it was used at times by the Buddha, but mainly actually in kind of to detract from his competitors. There's some people quite jealous about him, and they said, well, look, we've got miraculous powers. And so he had a competition of miracles, but it was pretty rare, and he only did it because to sort of dampen down their pride, because they thought this miraculous manifestations was the most important thing. It was a sign of realization. So the Buddha showed what a Tathagata can do in terms of manifestations, and of course that's pretty extraordinary because they have control over the entire fabric of time, space, and the cosmos.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I show people quite often. People will come to me for most commonly physical healing of some description. And, I'll be like, okay, no problem. And they'll be like, okay, well, what do I need to do? Well, if you really want to locate and isolate the very event, I generally put my transmissions at a certain period of the normal working week on a Friday afternoon for 1 or 2 hours, and I suggest that you to populate and resonate with that communion of the divinity frequency. You spend 72 hours after that transmission to just regulate this new level of consciousness. And they, they're like, oh my goodness, my loved one, this, that, something else, it just goes on. But it's a realization for them. Now, furthermore, take that going, this is beyond the mundane. This is not what I was given as the playbook of reality. Now I am inquiry. I'm in inquiry. I am in curiosity. I am seeking further, more an understanding of that, but not just from the material, not from this magical, paranormal, supernatural experience, but that's the seed. That should be a starting seed. If you're still on that path biologically 20 years later, perhaps maybe we should revisit the very reason why you're on the path, if that's the only thing that lures you into your own development. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. But again, like these sort of people who are just looking for healing and things like that, then they don't have the level of courage to, in this life anyway, to acquire any profound insight. They're just dealing with shit in their lives, right? Suffering and stuff like that. Which is what most of us are doing. We're just trying to get by and survive. And but that's okay, because you can be there for those sort of people. You can help them. You can heal them. You can help to steer them on the right path, and then in the hope that in future lifetimes or in future manifestations that they will take it to a more profound level. But for most people, it's just too much, right? I just want to feel good. I don't feel well. I'm depressed. I've got anxiety. I'm traumatized.
Right.
Help me, teacher.
Yeah. I mean, there is nothing ever that goes to waste from a Taoist path. Everything
Yeah.
has place and purpose. So as diminished or as limited as it may seem, there is a place and a purpose for that very experience. But it must be an experience. It cannot be a diluted state of I know this because someone told me that, and now I believe it. And I sit in my belief system, and that's the only thing that's driving me to continue moving through this mundane reality, because you will never ever resolve. You will never find the return of being whole if you continue to be the belief system, be limited by the identity. It will always turn to a deficient outcome, which is what most people experience. And so when you give them a frequency, when I transmit a frequency that is nothing more than their same frequency, only they're now going from misaligned to realigned, and a miracle takes place. I had a broken ankle; it's not broken. I had cancer. These are all very, quite frankly, common side effects of transmission. And that's just a cultivational practice that I have acquired from my reincarnation that I've been doing at least 1,000 lifetimes before this. And so it's very easy for me to move into that and remember who I am. And furthermore, to obtain that Brahman, that Wu Ji, that Buddha God, that unity, that has to come from a place of no return, no place, no person, no thing. And that has to be very clear. And you will find that from your self-realized experience. It cannot come from the mind in the separated psychological profile, which I personally believe.
You mean like mentation?
Right. Psychology is really a distraction. Psychology was designed to really have you in a perplexed state of separation, because the mind is the brain, which is furthermore another deluded path.
Yeah. The terms are a bit difficult because they talk about manas and chitta and all that sort of thing. But in general, then that's what we call mentation or cognitive kind of activity, conceptual activity. Yeah.
Well, this has been a very fascinating conversation. I can
Yeah, nice to
feel
see you
the,
again.
it's been really nice to see you. I furthermore will extend the invitation and hope at some point you will find a journey when you're not burdened by certain commitments to travel down to the sunny side of North America and experience
Yeah.
a little bit.
Well, we're thinking of doing a retreat somewhere down that
Okay,
way. Maybe California, but hey, maybe it could happen in Nevada. It's not that far, is it?
I would love
We
to be the
would you
next.
host us?
But yes, of course, of course.
Okay, maybe we can talk about that. That'd be nice. We're thinking of something in autumn. I don't know when the best weather is, but
Yeah,
we're thinking of sometime in autumn to do a kind of silent retreat
yeah,
for a week or something like that
yeah,
somewhere. And
yeah, yeah. We've got plenty of space here for a
that
guest house for you to.
oh, how many
Sorry,
people can stay?
the guest house you probably fit like 3 or 4 people comfortably. Actually, I've got
Okay,
two. Well, one guest house.
okay.
The other one I could fit 8.
Can you put? Is there space to put tents up?
Oh, absolutely. We have
Oh,
the
because we
resorts
were
are
thinking of doing a
perfect.
Dharma
Okay,
bum retreat where
okay,
people sleep
yeah,
in tents.
yeah. No, that would be
Um,
perfect.
that might be quite fun. Okay, well we can keep in touch over email. That'd be
We
nice.
will definitely keep in touch. And
Yeah,
again, thank you
yeah. And thank you for
for
having me.
yeah. Well, thank you for the incredible conversation because this is all someone needs is to listen to two different lenses of consciousness that are really the same, and merge that together and find some sense of relief by creating from hope a level of belief system that could turn into a knowing. But the hope is
And there's
where
also the connection, right? There's this possibility. Sorry, there's this possibility to have a connection with the teaching through encountering it. So
you
that's always
know.
very positive if you have an open mind.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like there's so many people that are self-proclaimed teachers of consciousness that are just full of shit. I mean, I mean, I'm just being honest with you. You know it, and I
Yeah.
know it. As
But
the
they're just selling stuff, right? Most people are
well,
just looking for an alternative source of income and selling you stuff. And many of them think they see themselves as being quite kind of altruistic, and they think they're selling a genuine product, but they don't understand that it's not a product, right? It's not something to be sold. And then because we have this tendency towards having very worldly ways of thinking, then there has to be some kind of living out of it, right? It's like a transaction. I think most of us are very transactional in this way. But anyway, we can save that for another conversation.
yes, I would love that, my dear friend.
Yeah, yeah.
So, in
Okay.
closing, I will ask you what's your definition of spiritual consciousness.
So it's difficult, right? Because in Buddhism, when we talk about consciousness, we talk about this changing continuum of experiences, right? Like sight, sounds, taste. And then in the Hindu tradition, we think of consciousness as this sort of divine or supreme principle. So there's a difference there. And what we talk about in the Buddha Dharma is awareness, right? Which awareness is somehow, it's not correct, but somehow separate from consciousness itself. But really, if we look at the Mahamudra and Dzogchen, what we're talking about is that this visceral, present experience that we have, that is personal, is, this kind of principle of infinite consciousness or whatever. And where we go wrong is we kind of mix up our direct experience with the way we conceptualize about it. And we think they're the same. And then we get caught in this loop, we get caught in a feedback loop. But if you just leave things as they are, without identification, without judgment, and without this tendency to mistake our ideas about experience, which is always out of time, right? It's always behind, it's always late, because we have an experience and we think about it. We see them to be the same. And if you lose all that, then you have what is called naked awareness. And that is how we define what you would call spiritual consciousness. And it sounds kind of like, well, that's nothing special. But it's because most people haven't experienced it, because they
Mhm.
never get out of this loop. What happens is that from time to time, certain conditions will cause us to have this feeling of openness and freedom and liberation, non-conceptual, peaceful and profound. And it happens for short periods of time. We might be doing yoga. We might just have been in an accident in a car. And then suddenly we realize we're okay. We have these short periods of recognition of this naked awareness. But the problem for us is we have no access to it. We have no willing way that we can access it. And because our minds are kind of like a feather being blown in the wind, it never is able to settle. And we never find this peace. And as somebody who has recognized this true nature for what it is, then there is no question about having to meditate it into existence or having to clear away obscurations and emotional negativities, because they recognize direct experience to be what we call enlightenment itself.
That is beautiful, my dear friend. That, I always refer to it as a visceral, kinesthetic, somatic now moment. And that's everything. It's now. And with that, I just want to thank you, my dear friend, for
Thank you
being
for having me.
Remembering our friendship as
It's good to see you
from
again.
many past lives. And thank you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. I am your humble servant, Sifu Taoist Master San Qing, and I'll see you on the
My
next one.
name's Lama Choga. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.